Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, October 19th, 2018. Time for, it's time for another show. Should we do another show? I don't even know. Who cares? I mean, at this point, we're so far gone. I don't know. Do we continue? I guess so. Plenty to catch up on, of course. And the weekend is coming, and weird things are also going to explode into the news over the weekend. We'll try and take a guess here and there about what those things might be and prepare you for dialogue over the weekend. If you're still reaching across the aisle, probably stop. It's about time. We got to catch up on all sorts of things that happened in the last couple of days. There was another hate rally yesterday at which I guess the president had a great time talking about beating up and possibly murdering journalists, and journalists stuck around after the rally to ask questions of those who had made threatening gestures like a knife across the throat gesture to Jim Acosta. Wanted to catch up with the deplorables who do such things, and I guess he didn't get much out of the guy. I saw this happening this morning. I don't want to, this is not to criticize how Jim Acosta or anybody else does their job necessarily, although I guess that does sort of enter into it given what was going on here. He tweeted, I don't know, what did he tweet this morning? Yeah, I guess so. Early this morning, the disturbing part, he said, of Trump's jokes about Gianforte. He was in a rally in Montana and, of course, thought it would be a hilarious bit of local color to discuss how the current member of Congress from Montana, the member of the House, Gianforte, of course, became famous for body slamming. That's the terminology that's being used. I don't know exactly how this whole thing went down, what it looked like, but body slamming a reporter, and of course making the news with it, and apparently it bothering almost nobody. I think the way that one got settled, as I recall, was that the journalist in question, and I guess I kind of have to scroll back to even remember the entire story and who did what. Here we are. His the Axios report on what happened yesterday, and then, of course, a few tweets about it. We'll begin with the Axios tweet that came through this morning. President Trump praising Representative Greg Gianforte for body slamming a reporter, a crime for which Gianforte pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor assault. As I recall, there was a plea deal involved, and it involved also, part of the settlement was, okay, well, this reporter who you body slammed, you should apologize to, and you should give him an exclusive interview. And I think he actually backed out of doing the interview, and then nothing happened, which was sort of weird and amazing, except really not, because he, like Trump, has been playing these guys like a fiddle for a long time, and I guess it's just not really all that interesting to watch them become befuddled about this anymore. It's a little difficult to watch, I guess. There was also, let's see, shall I back up a little bit more? I think so. There was a tweet from, where were we? A little bit back. Benjamin Applebaum. Ben Applebaum. Does he go by Ben at all? Benjamin Applebaum, who was tweeting about this whole thing and saying, Greg Gianforte is a criminal. He pled guilty to assaulting Ben Jacobs. That's the reporter in question. The president is congratulating a criminal on committing a crime. Yes. And the video clip that circulated yesterday, here's a video of Trump on Greg Gianforte body slamming Ben Jacobs. Any guy that could do a body slam, he's my kind of guy. And apparently that was hugely entertaining, as anyone, I think, could have predicted, to the crowd at the rally. Jim Acosta, finally we get back to this, says the disturbing part of Trump's jokes about Gianforte was the effect on the crowd. Was it? That's so amazing. I can't believe it. yes, I mean, that's what it was designed to do. But okay. The disturbing part was the effect on the crowd. I saw one young man. Why, a young man? I saw one young man in the crowd making body slam gestures. He looked at me, Jim Acosta, can you believe it? And he ran his thumb across his throat. I talked to him after the rally was over. He couldn't stop laughing. And I have to suggest to Jim, who, again, I don't know what to tell you about how to do your job. I don't even know what it is anymore. But I do say this, it is possible. I want you to consider the possibility that he was laughing because you were there. Because you had attended an event and then you knew what was coming. You witnessed what happened. You witnessed the audience reaction. You witnessed this particular individual make the knife across the throat gesture to you, and you stayed to interview him afterward. I think it's possible that he was laughing because you had stayed to talk to him, even though both he and Trump were openly celebrating right before your very eyes the thought of beating and murdering you. And the fact that you stayed, I'm sure in your mind you're like, well, I'm an intrepid reporter. That doesn't scare me. I'll stay here and I'll get the news, damn it. And I guess they're just thinking the news. Suppose I turn that channel of the news, I turn off the TV and then murder you. What's the difference? You're so intrepid. And that's the world they live in. I don't know that they'll ever do it. I mean, of course, it was done to Jamal Khashoggi. And we'll get back to that in a little bit. But I don't know that these guys really have the fortitude to do it. I don't know if I want to test them or anything. But in their minds, if they were to just spit in your face, they'd laugh. And you would say, I'm filing a report with the police. No, I mean with my outlets. We're going to report fully on the fact that you did this, you know. You'll be hearing from me on CNN's airwaves about how disrespectful. I think they think that it's funny that you guys will stand for anything. And I'm not sure. I mean, your job is to kind of stand for anything and report what happened. And I guess that's brave. I wouldn't want to be there as a reporter. But at the same time, it's also, I mean, I guess if you can't see why those guys think that's so funny, then I don't know. Maybe you're worthless as a reporter if you can't get to the bottom of this. I mean, or maybe you've gotten to the bottom of it and you have reported and I haven't noticed it. But I mean, how about filing a report that says these people have no idea about what American values are with respect to the free press. They feel unbounded by the rule of law, and yet they stand there and chant for the rule of law and for law and order, and Trump leads them in cheers about it, but he's full of it. He's lying because he's also encouraging outright lawlessness, right up to the point of just murdering your political enemies, and these two things are incompatible. He's an idiot and a fascist, and the people who like him are idiots and fascists, but I can't say that because something, be fair, both sides, yada yada, one time Hillary did this thing. I don't know. Who knows what excuse they're going to use. I just find it interesting that I really just don't think that they're getting it in terms of why are they not there to try and figure out for us, to analyze for us what it is about Trump rallies that makes Trump supporters tick or something? I mean, let's finally report at the end of all of this that the reason that they rally and the reason that this person was laughing and the reason that this person made this gesture is that they have no respect for anything. They're not Americans. They're upside down and backwards from Americans. They're brown shirts in the making, and we should just say so. Well, this young man was laughing, and I really just don't understand what yada yada. I guess. I don't know. Anyway, Boo Radley disagrees strongly. As a reporter for more than 30 years and one who was struck with bricks and witnessed a colleague repeatedly kicked in the head, I find your diatribe this morning mocking the CNN reporter, which is not what I'm doing. I find your analysis of this, quite frankly, revealing about your ignorance, Boo Radley. But I've got to read your comment for you because I'm covering both sides. As a reporter for more than 30 years and one who is struck with bricks and witnessed a colleague repeatedly kicked in the head, I find your diatribe this morning mocking the CNN reporter quite revealing about your ignorance. You are just another clickbait shock jock. Ta-da! Well, I don't think so. I strongly disagree with you. You can strongly disagree with me. I don't feel like I'm mocking the CNN reporter. I feel like I'm trying to wake the guy up to the fact that he's missing the story as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not a reporter, so I can't criticize him on a professional level. But I find it astonishing that I get no indication from Jim here that he understands that they have no respect for what he does there, and they think it would be funny to clobber him. I don't, nor would I clobber him. This guy would. Boo Radley's mad with me because I don't clobber people with bricks or kick anybody in the head. That's okay. I'll do the Trump. That's okay. You're mad with me. That's all right. I understand. I don't really, quite frankly. I find my diatribe entirely within my rights. And there it is. And I'm not going to hit anybody for it. And I don't tell Jim Acosta I don't know how to do his job any better. I don't know what else to do. They're supposed to be there to cover it. But what's clearly funny to these guys, and I guess to be fair, Jim Acosta doesn't say, I'm baffled as to what this kid found funny. I just think it's important that we note at some point that I think Jim should take a guess as to why the guy's laughing if he wants to provide some analysis. And again, maybe that's not his job. I just report the facts on the ground. You analyze. We report, you decide. Apparently that's the way we do things. And I find it intriguing, I guess. I find it frustrating, perhaps, that I get no indication, and maybe it's my fault, but I get no indication from Jim Acosta that he's gleaned from this or any other experience that, why it is that somebody would find it funny, why they would laugh. And I guess another possibility of why he's laughing is that it's nervous laughter. And maybe it's somewhat revealing in that sense. I guess if you look at it a different way, and all it really is that a guy, when there's distance between us and the pen is between us and the security standing between us, that you make these kinds of gestures. This is also I should have considered this possibility from the outset, that when there's a separation like that, you cheer and whoop and holler and enjoy it, and then draw your thumb across your throat and make threatening gestures like that. And then when you're face to face, you laugh and you don't knife me in the throat. You don't attack me. You don't even spit on me. You don't even scream in my face. Nothing like that. It's just nervous laughter, because what Jim has done here is, look, I'm going to come straight up to you and ask you what's going on here. And all you can muster is nervous laughter because you realize I really haven't got the guts to do any of the things that I whooped and hollered about a few minutes ago when there was separation between us. That is a possibility. I would love to hear that analysis from Jim. And again, maybe this is Twitter. He doesn't put his analysis here. Maybe it goes in his on-air reports. I just, I don't really know exactly what to counsel Acosta to do, and I don't know any reason why he would take my counsel about it. But I really feel like it's 2-3 years now of going right up to the line of just saying, yeah, we understand what's happening here, and then just not saying it. And it's left to people elsewhere to say those things. And I guess I'm one of those people. But I guess Boo Radley doesn't want me to be one of those people. I don't know why. As a journalist who was struck with bricks, I tell you, that was, I'm sure, a brave thing to do. I don't know under what circumstances that happened. Sounds like it sucks. Maybe it was the same kind of people, where I don't know whether it was here. I don't know whether it was abroad. And yes, people have to be there to cover these things, although I don't know that anybody really has to be there to cover these rallies either. But I am hesitant to counsel, oh, well, stop covering him altogether, because I'm a little bit worried about what can happen without coverage and without any scrutiny of what's actually happening and the kind of people who are attending these events. Because without that, how do we get the picture? So there's that, and that's why I say I can't step in and say you can't go anymore. This is what you should do, or you should say this, or you shouldn't say that. But I do feel like we seem to be getting our reportage on the ground from people who are just dead set against saying that. I mean, it's a disturbing thing, the effect on the crowd. Well, what was the effect on the crowd exactly? I guess I could ask for that, right? He tweets that the disturbing part of Trump's jokes was the effect on the crowd. Well, one effect, well, it's not really even, doesn't tell us what the effect on the crowd is. A guy I saw made a gesture, and it was a threatening one, and I talked to him, and he laughed. Well, those are things that happened in the crowd, but what was the effect on the crowd? We're supposed to glean that for ourselves. And I think one of two things is possible to draw as a conclusion. One, he's whipping them to a murderous rage, and one day they'll kill one of you here and not in a consulate overseas. Or two, that they really are at heart chickens, and then what? Something we should do about it? Should we go to the rallies? Should we go to the rallies and force them to violence? Should we go to the rallies and incite our own violence? Should we stay away from the rallies? Should we ignore the rallies? I don't know what to make of it. And I'm confused and upset and frustrated, which apparently sucks, but there it is. Today I got up and there was a microphone here and I got annoyed and I wanted to say a thing. And I did. And I didn't even use any bricks or kick anybody. I'm a little bit annoyed about that, to be quite honest. But okay. You know, if I have the right to say those things, then I'm sure it's only fair that others have the right to say, no, that actually sucks as an opinion. And I wish you would take it better. So I think that's a fair thing to say. I don't think that means I have to take it any better, nor am I a particularly good person at heart, so that's the way I've taken it. There we are. Well, you know, next Yom Kippur, we'll deal with that one. Do I feel better? Not particularly, but I am done, at least with this one. I am surprised that this continues to happen, and I am surprised that we have come up with, collectively, no real satisfying answer for what members of the press really ought to do when confronted with this stuff. Except that I really wish that I could wake up to headlines that say, that's it. This guy who claims to be president is crazy. You ought to be arrested. And the dangers of fascism are greater now than ever before. And the evidence is here. However, it is worth noting that the bulk of the members of the audience are chicken crap at heart and will collapse into nervous laughter, retreat into nervous laughter when confronted directly. At least I think so. When confronted with a person who has a video camera on him. However, without that camera present and a potentially rich and famous plaintiff in a lawsuit or complainant in a legal proceeding, a criminal proceeding against me, in the absence of that kind of evidence and videotape, I might beat the crap out of you. I might stomp you to death. I might cut your throat. Not really sure. All right. Well, we now have that information. Although, quite honestly, I think we had that information already, and guess I'm just expressing my frustration at not being able to put my finger on what sort of return on investment I really think would be worth it in order to continue to go to these things and subject yourself to it. It must be, I am convinced to some extent about the nervous laughter theory, but I am still unable to shake the very real possibility, and I think that this is present in some measure in this guy's response too, that he finds it hilarious and unmanly and therefore in some way unseemly, because we're supposed to, whatever. We have, toxic masculinity problems in the country as well. And I think that there's some part of this guy's reaction is, I can't believe how unmanly Jim Manley is, I guess. Not Jim Manley, I'm sorry, I've got the wrong Jim. Although Jim Manley, you're not particularly manly either. I just want to tell you that because you're a friend and I thought I would rib you about it a little bit. Jim Acosta, I'm guessing that to a guy at a Trump rally in Missoula, Montana, the idea of standing there and taking that abuse and letting people scream at you and call you a filthy, disgusting media whore and threaten you with death and laughing about body slamming you, without you getting up your gumption and having a fight because them's fighting words or whatever, just continues to heighten their disrespect for you. But I don't think there's any respect to be won from them. So in that sense, there's really not much to do. But it must be shocking and surprising to somebody who really wishes you ill to see you walk up with a microphone and say, "Why do you wish me harm?" And he just laughs in your face. And part of it is nervous laughter. I don't really know what to do. I want to kill you, but I think I'll be in trouble if I do. And on the other hand, ha ha ha, why do you people come and take this abuse all the time? I'm sure that guy's solution to it is don't go. I don't think that makes any particular sense in terms of, doing this. I mean, for him to say don't go is nothing. Don't go. Don't you do your job and report on how disgusting I am. Well, that's an obvious solution for that guy. All right. Well, moving on from that, I guess we should comment a little bit on the fact that Republicans, this time as reported by Robert Costa from the Washington Post, also an intrepid reporter who continues to do this work despite the fact that everyone he seems to talk to thinks he's worthless scum, has this to report: conservatives mount a whisper campaign smearing Khashoggi in defense of Trump. That is where we are. And I did see it predicted, and I think probably correctly, earlier this morning that we are about a week away. We'll see who said that so we can credit them with it. Nick Wiger, W-I-G-E-R. You tell me. Nick, how do you pronounce that? He says we're about a week out from the rally where Trump does an impression of Khashoggi getting murdered. I think we are less than a week away from just simply outright ridicule, like actually mocking Khashoggi as he's being murdered or for being murdered. I did theorize yesterday in the face of some of the more egregious comments and circulation of ridiculous rumors among Republicans. They simply, at this point, they no longer seem to care whether their rumors have any basis in reality or not. They simply start saying things. Who's that goofball, but very dangerous goofball, member of Congress, one of the more outspoken, Matt Gaetz, is that his name? Yeah, and who knows whether I'm pronouncing it correctly or not, but he, like one of the most reckless and accusatory members of Congress. I've never really seen anybody operating quite like him. There are many people like him, but nobody quite rising to his level. And he spent the day yesterday insisting that a video that he saw online and was circulating of people who were purported to be members of the migrant caravan, one of two or perhaps several migrant caravans moving allegedly toward the United States. I guess at this point, the hard news reporting is that they have crossed the border between Honduras and Guatemala and are on their way through Guatemala and on their way then to the border with Mexico. And I guess the idea is to make it all the way up through Mexico and apply for asylum in the United States, though the history of these migrant caravans is such that the numbers tend to dissipate greatly by the time they get all the way up north for various reasons. But Matt Gaetz saw some video of some Spanish-speaking people in a large crowd somewhere, and people handing out papers to these folks in the crowd, And Matt Gaetz just flatly said, oh, well, what this is a video of George Soros's money being distributed in cash to pay off people to join the migrant caravan and overwhelm the United States with people who want to do the jobs that we don't want to do or something like that. I don't know. I'm not sure what their theory of immigration actually is, but this is the idea here. They're handing out paper. I can't tell you. I can't see in the video whether the paper is any kind of currency anywhere. It could just be paper of some kind with who knows what on it. And I don't know where the video is being shot. All I can tell you is there are Spanish speakers in the video that I can hear, some of which I can actually understand a little bit of what's going on. But certainly nowhere in the video is, hey, everybody, step right up and get your free cash from George Soros just so long as you agree to march all the way to the United States and enter the country illegally. That clearly isn't happening. But Matt Gaetz, member of Congress, goes on TV everywhere, gives interviews everywhere, and just says that's what's happening. And I did muse yesterday, if I were that unbounded a liar, I could perhaps circulate any number of the pictures that we have of Trump with fists raised, particularly of two fists raised, hands clenched, and just tell people this is an actual picture taken today of the president mocking the dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi, who had his fingers cut off, of course, as we all now know, in this in his murder. And I'm holding up my fist. See, I have no fingers up at all, which is actually kind of a difficult thing to tell with Trump, whether or not he's really doing that. But and people would believe it. And people on my own side here, our own side here, would believe it too. And that's the big danger of it. And then, of course, but Republicans would say, this is an outrageous lie. I can debunk this. This picture was actually taken, blah, 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 and I can show you the records of it on the internet. And that really wouldn't be the point. The point would be, you're doing this all the time. This is how outrageous this really is. That point, of course, would sail directly over their heads. And then they'd make the throat-slashing motion at me, and then we'd all be in the same place. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Still a lot to talk about what happened here. I'll jump over, or rather back to Robert Costa's piece here, byline shared here with Karoun, K-A-R-O-U-N. I don't know whether it's pronounced Karen or something different. Demirjian, Karoun Demirjian. So we'll respect the O-U-N and give it a pronunciation and not anglicize it. Here's the piece. Conservatives mount a whisper campaign smearing Khashoggi in defense of Trump. It can't just be that a reporter was murdered and that's a bad thing. It now is essentially, it's now essentially a Mike Brown thing. Well, he's no angel, this Khashoggi. And in addition to which, the more subtle version of it, I guess, among conservatives and elsewhere is, well, he's not a journalist per se. He's an opinion columnist, not a straight reporter. And that's somehow different or whatever. And anyway, from there, it launches into the more ridiculous. Hardline Republicans and conservative commentators are mounting a whispering campaign against Jamal Khashoggi that is designed to protect President Trump from criticism of his handling of the dissident journalist's alleged murder by operatives of Saudi Arabia. Okay, I mean, delicate language, right? And support Trump's continued aversion to a forceful response to the oil-rich desert kingdom. In recent days, a cadre of conservative House Republicans allied with Trump has been privately exchanging articles from right-wing outlets that fuel suspicion of Khashoggi, highlighting his association with the Muslim Brotherhood in his youth, and raising conspiratorial questions about his work decades ago as an embedded reporter covering Osama bin Laden, according to 4 GOP officials involved in the discussions who were not authorized to speak publicly. Now, I don't know how developed this gets in this piece, but in case they don't get to it, I thought I would also mention another tweet which I saw making the rounds earlier this morning. Who am I looking at? Julia McFarlane, ABC News reporter. See, I mean, I'm not saying reporters don't know how to do their jobs. They do. Who tweets this morning in response to one Patrick Poole, who puts himself forth as the national security and terrorism correspondent, which is amazing given what ignorance is displayed here. I will just put everyone's ignorance on display here, including my own. And that way, later on, we can all, what about the ignorance that I've displayed with the ignorance of others, and do some hand waving and maybe settle some of the settle some of the frayed nerves and smooth over some of the insult that has gone on here today. Patrick Poole, national security and terrorism correspondent for PJ Media, remember Pajamas Media, who says, I guess he's among the group mentioned here by Costa. I got to get back up to the top to see how he puts this here. That they were raising conspiratorial questions about his work decades ago as an embedded reporter covering Osama bin Laden. And everyone knows that whenever you say Osama bin Laden, right? Oh my God, Osama. But remember, if you have a brain in your head or access to a book, any kind of book, at any point in your life, you'll remember that Osama bin Laden was a complicated man, to say the least. And that, but of course the mention of him is supposed to, and it does, and everybody invokes his name every once in a while to strike terror or to give the audience the intended shock value, because we're all shock jocks at bottom, I guess. We forget, or conveniently forget, or ignore, or never learn in the first place, that Osama bin Laden was, at one point, hero of the Republic, Osama bin Laden, Mujahideen, who had showed up in Afghanistan to fight alongside the rebels of Afghanistan who were fighting the then Soviet Union's invasion of that country, and that the United States and others supplied them with the arms necessary to do it because the enemy of the enemy is my friend, and yada, yada, yada. But now Russia is our friend, and Osama bin Laden is our enemy, and that's the way things go in geopolitics. It does happen. And to raise conspiratorial questions about his work decades ago as an embedded reporter covering Osama bin Laden is to probably, intentionally, though possible that you're entirely ignorant of it, ignore the fact that at that time, Osama bin Laden was big hero to the United States and fighting with weapons we had given him in our worldwide battle against global communisms. And that he was a good guy for doing that at the time, in the eyes of conservatives in particular. But now they're going to use that against him. Look, he's palling around with Osama bin Laden. So therefore, obviously, he's also Muslim, so that means he's a terrorist, and therefore he deserves to be kidnapped in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, and have his fingers cut off and then be decapitated. On tape, as it happens. Audio tape, to be sure, which makes them basically no better than a cut-rate ISIS, but don't worry about that because reasons, including money. Anyway, so here they are now highlighting his association with the Muslim Brotherhood and raising conspiratorial questions about his work decades ago as an embedded reporter covering Osama bin Laden, about which, as I mentioned, Julia McFarlane tweets to Patrick Poole, "My dude, The RPG he's holding was financed by the Reagan administration. Learn some history. Hashtag. Patrick Poole had said, of course, I didn't realize until yesterday that Jamal Khashoggi was the author of this notorious 1988 Arab News article of him tooling around Afghanistan with Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda co-founder Abdullah Azzam. He's just now this is interesting, he's just a Democrat reformer journalist holding a RPG with jihadists. And of course, yes, it's entirely correct to say he's working as a Reagan administration operative here fighting the Soviet Union, and before you were born, probably, you would have thought this was awesome. Anyway, the aspersions to which Costa and his co-author Demirjian refer here, which many lawmakers have been wary of stating publicly because of the political risks of doing so. Are there any? We'll find out in about, 10 days? Have begun to flare into public view as conservative media outlets have amplified the claims, that's their job, which are aimed in part at protecting Trump as he works to preserve the U.S.-Saudi relationship and avoid confronting the Saudis on human rights. Trump's remarks about reporters amid the Khashoggi fallout have inflamed existing tensions between his allies and the media. At a Thursday rally in Montana, Trump openly praised Representative Greg Gianforte, Republican of Montana, for assaulting a reporter in his bid for Congress last year. Any guy that can do a body slam, he's my guy. He's my guy, Trump said. Hours earlier, prominent conservative television personalities were making insinuations about Khashoggi's background. Khashoggi was tied to the Muslim Brotherhood, Fox News anchor Harris Faulkner asserted on Thursday's highly rated Outnumbered show. I just put it out there because it is in the constellation of things that are being talked about. Faulkner then dismissed another guest who called her claim iffy. Okay, goodbye. The message was echoed on the campaign trail. Virginia Republican Corey A. Stewart, who is challenging, barely, Tim Kaine in Virginia, told a local radio program Thursday that Khashoggi was not a good guy himself. While Khashoggi was once sympathetic to Islamist movements, he moved toward a more liberal, secular point of view, according to experts on the Middle East who have tracked his career. Khashoggi knew bin Laden in the 1980s and 1990s during the civil war in Afghanistan, but his interactions with bin Laden were as a journalist with a point of view, can't have that, who was working with a prized source. Khashoggi, a Saudi citizen, left his home country last year and was granted residency in the United States by federal authorities. He lived in Virginia and, in case you didn't know, wrote for the Washington Post. Nevertheless, the smears have escalated. Donald Trump Jr., the president's eldest son and key political booster, shared another person's tweet last week with his millions of followers that included a line that Khashoggi was, quote, tooling around Afghanistan with Osama bin Laden. That would have been the Patrick Poole tweet that we just heard about from Julia McFarlane. Tooling around Afghanistan with Osama bin Laden in the 1980s, even though the context was a feature story on bin Laden's activities, about which are you really going to say nothing? That's amazing, too. A Tuesday broadcast of CRTV, a conservative online outlet founded by popular talk radio host Mark Levin, labeled Khashoggi a longtime friend of terrorists and claimed without evidence, there's that line again, that Trump was the victim of an, quote, insane media conspiracy to tarnish him. The broadcast has been viewed more than 12,000 times. A story in far-right Front Page magazine casts Khashoggi as a cynical and manipulative apologist for Islamic terrorism, not the mythical martyr dissident. Did anybody say he was a mythical martyr dissident? Whose disappearance the media has spent the worst part of a week raving about, because murder. And features a garish cartoon of bin Laden and Khashoggi with their arms around each other. The conservative push comes as Saudi government supporters on Twitter have sought in a propaganda campaign to denigrate Khashoggi as a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamist movement once tolerated but now outlawed in Saudi Arabia as a terrorist organization. Trump wants to take a soft line, so Trump supporters are finding excuses for him to take it. said William Crystal, who we should never be listening to, a conservative Trump critic. One of those excuses is attacking the person who was murdered. Several Trump administration aides are aware of the Khashoggi attacks circulating on Capitol Hill and in conservative media, the GOP officials said, adding that aides are being careful to not encourage the disparagement, but are also doing little to contest it. The GOP officials declined to share the names of the lawmakers and others who are circulating the information critical of Khashoggi because they said doing so would risk exposing them as sources. Fred Hyatt, the Post's editorial page editor who published Khashoggi's work, sharply criticized the false and distorted claims about Khashoggi, who is feared to have been killed and dismembered by Saudi operatives. Anyone who knew Jamal and read his columns, he was dedicated to the values of free speech and open debate. He went into exile to promote those values, and now he may even have lost his life for his dogged determination in their defense, Hyatt said in a statement, which is the general position that most of the rest of the world is coming from, which is difficult to swallow, given that that puts you on the same page as Fred Hyatt, who we're never really big fans of, but there you have it. It may not be surprising that some Saudi-inspired trolls are now trying to distract us from the crime by smearing Jamal. It may not even be surprising to see a few Americans joining in. But in both cases, it is reprehensible. Trump said Thursday it appears Khashoggi is dead and warned that his administration could consider, quote, very severe, unquote, measures against Saudi Arabia, which is conducting its own self-investigation. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin also announced that he would not attend the Future Investment Initiative Summit in Saudi Arabia next week, delivering the Trump administration's first formal rebuke of Saudi Arabia's royal family. The president is concerned. He believes the relationship is important. So do I. But he also understands he's a leader in the world stage and everybody is watching and he's very concerned. That's actually almost reasonable. And it came from Senator Lindsey Graham, who met with Trump on Thursday. Trump, whose grip on reality is questionable? No. Whose grip on his party remains strong, less than 3 weeks before the midterm elections, has seen his cautious approach to Saudi Arabia bolstered not only by the maligning of Khashoggi, but also by a conservative media infrastructure that is generally wary of traditional news organizations and establishment Republicans. As criticism of Trump grows, powerful players in that orbit have stood by the president. Donald Trump is keeping his eye on the ball, keeping his eye on the geopolitical ball, the national security ball. He's not going to get sidetracked by what happened to a journalist, maybe, in the consulate there. He's not giving cover to anybody, syndicated talk radio host Rush Limbaugh said on Tuesday. For those who are screaming, blood for the Saudis, I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean. Look, these people are key allies, evangelical leader Pat Robertson said this week. We've got an arms deal that everybody wanted a piece of. It'll be a lot of jobs, a lot of money come to our coffers. It's not something you want to blow up willy-nilly, like with brutal murder. It isn't something you want to blow up willy-nilly. So don't murder people in your consulate. That's good advice, too. Some Republicans on Capitol Hill, on the other hand, are discussing the possibility of legislative action against Saudi Arabia or other ways to lessen U.S. support. Intelligence community officials this week have been providing continuous briefings on the investigation into Khashoggi's disappearance to the intelligence committees, whose members enjoy special clearance to view and hear sensitive information. But in both the House and the Senate, lawmakers with such clearance, including the leading Republicans on foreign policy matters, have grown frustrated with what many see as a deliberate attempt by the Trump administration to slow walk responses to congressional requests for information about Khashoggi's disappearance, or in some cases, ignore lawmakers' questions outright. We heard about this yesterday. Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Bob Menendez of New Jersey, be the ranking member there, have taken the step of invoking the Global Magnitsky Act to force Trump to report to Congress on whether people should face sanctions over Khashoggi's alleged death, including Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince, Mr. Bonesaw, Mohammed bin Salman. Yet there has been little confidence among senators that Trump will suddenly feel pressure to penalize high-ranking Saudi officials or take other sweeping punitive measures In the House, a perceived lack of cooperation from the White House on Khashoggi has compelled some Republicans to take a new interest in a bill to invoke the War Powers Resolution to curtail U.S. military support for the Saudi-led coalition operating in Yemen's civil war. But the legislation has not secured the support of leading Republicans. Last year, the House voted 366 to 30 to approve a non-binding resolution stating that the United States' support for the Saudi-led coalition had not been congressionally authorized, an effort that did not rattle the administration, which continued to build its relationships with Saudi royalty, which is probably a euphemism. Earlier this year, the Senate failed to enact legislation that would have curtailed U.S. support for the Saudi war effort after appeals from Saudi officials and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis not to pass the measure. That's where we stand in a pretty decent roundup there, although it is somewhat shocking that there was no explanation offered as to why Jamal Khashoggi and under what circumstances he would have found himself in the company of an armed Osama bin Laden in 1988. I guess that's left to the rest of us. Well, that's what we do here. We bring those things up. All right, there's more, and it's coming from all over the place. Let's see. What am I looking at here? What is this? Why do I have... This doesn't look like it connects to anything. Was this supposed to be... Yeah, all right. Well, this it doesn't connect to anything. Okay, so we'll get rid of that piece here in Pocket. I was wondering what that was. Let's see. There is more to share here. Let's see. Other stories. Anything else connected to Khashoggi that needs mention? Perhaps in this morning's tweets rather than in Pocket here. But I'm trying to think about whether or not we have entirely wrapped things up or not. Let's see. Oh, by the way, I guess I didn't pay adequate attention to the message embedded in Bill's morning tweet here, letting everybody know that the Boston Red Sox won the American League Championship last night. Did we miss that? I did, and they did it. So there we go. There we go. And then on to, can we say, here we are, can we say, suck it, Texas on the air? Is that what, did I have some kind of strange Freudian slip there? Okay. Can we say it? Yeah, sure. Go ahead and say it. It's not fair to all of the people in Texas, and there are some very blue pockets of Texas, and I don't know. You know how we are here in Democrat land, and I guess now we have to go and interview people from Texas and say, why did you make that threatening gesture to us after we said suck it, Texas? Well, anyway, congratulations to the Boston Red Sox. I guess it's good. I don't know. I'm not a big baseball fan these days. It used to be just not the case anymore. So, I don't know. Bill's happy, so I'll just be happy for Bill. How about that one? We can live with that. That's not huge news to me, but, Red Sox. I know how you people are. You and your baseball. Anyway, so let's make note of that at the very least. Let's see. Other items that on the short side that should probably be brought up. Let's see. That's really kind of old news here. How about this one? Let's throw this one out there because it's gotten no attention, I don't think, here on the show. It's possible it got mentioned and I don't remember it. But this is a story circulating down in the Missouri Senate race, which has been on Greg's radar for a while, and he's very worried about Claire McCaskill there. Kansas City.com, which I guess is from the Kansas City Star, that's their web page, has this news from from the McClatchy, D.C. reporter Brian Lowry. Fake intern who recorded McCaskill campaign, I missed this one, had access to voter info, campaign says. Well, fake intern who recorded McCaskill. Who does that sound like? Yeah, it sounds like the work of James O'Keefe. And guess what? It is. This is the story. A conservative activist with Project Veritas, the ironically named Project Veritas, posed as an intern by not using any Veritas with United States Senator Claire McCaskill's campaign. and had access to voter information, according to a stack of documents McCaskill's lawyer delivered to Attorney General Josh Hawley's office Friday. That's not going to do you much good, of course, because Josh Hawley is, involved in this whole thing. And unlikely, I would guess, to play it fair and even in this case, because, of course, he's running for Senate against Claire McCaskill right now. That's problematic. If you thought that it was only a problem if Republican secretaries of state were standing for election as judges, essentially, in their own cases, then you might as well add Josh Hawley to the pile and say, yeah, it could be bad with attorneys general. Project Veritas, a conservative activist group run by James O'Keefe, released surreptitiously recorded videos of McCaskill and her campaign this week as part of a series of undercover videos meant to damage Democratic candidates ahead of next month's midterm election. Because journalism, that's what we do. Journalism is about damaging Democratic candidates ahead of a midterm election. That's how you can tell that someone is a real journalist, I guess. An employee of Project Veritas approached McCaskill's campaign. By the way, I skipped the sentence here. McCaskill's re-election fight with Hawley could decide control of the U.S. Senate, so it's kind of important. An employee of Project Veritas approached McCaskill's campaign in May and expressed an interest in volunteering and interning in the campaign, according to an affidavit from McCaskill's Columbia field director, Luke Tonant. As an intern, the Project Veritas employee, who Tonant knew as, quote, Adam Thompson, which I guess is not that person's real name, had access to the campaign's voter information database for a total of 20 hours between May and July, according to the affidavit. The Project Veritas employee continued to volunteer for the campaign after resigning his internship, in July, and even attended McCaskill's primary election night party, where he obtained the video of McCaskill speaking about her support for gun control measures. Now, I didn't hear anything. Usually I do hear about the latest in James O'Keefe's escapades pretty quickly after they make the news, and this one took a while to bubble up to my notice. The affidavit is part of a 115-page complaint McCaskill's attorney filed with Hawley's office Thursday in an effort to pressure the Republican Attorney General and McCaskill's opponent to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate whether Project Veritas violated Missouri law in the course of obtaining the videos. That would be good stuff. But of course, guess what? Josh Hawley doesn't want to do it. Chuck Hatfield, McCaskill's attorney, contended that as a nonprofit, Project Veritas is subject to the Missouri law that bars the use of fraud or deception in solicitation of charitable funds. Sounds like a good law. Hatfield argued that the group's undercover videos are directly tied to its fundraising efforts, and they are. Hatfield said that the person posing as an intern, quote, deceitfully omitted that they were affiliated with Project Veritas. Neither Ms. McCaskill nor the staffers interviewed would have consented to any conversations at all had they known the individuals were affiliated with convicted criminal James O'Keefe. And that's the way to say it. Hawley has heavily promoted the videos, rather than actually agreeing to do something about it, and dismissed the McCaskill campaign's call for an investigation. Marco Bruno, spokesperson for Project Veritas Action Fund, contended in a statement that the videos were an act of journalism. It looks like a sitting United States senator is trying to criminalize investigative journalism. All of our investigations are done legally. Not only do we operate according to the letter of the law, but also to the spirit and intent of the law. By the spirit and intent of the law, Bruno said, except for the ones in which we don't. And we end up getting convicted, as was the case with, was it Mary Landrieu's campaign in Louisiana, where they totally didn't and ended up in the wrong side of the law? Well, aside from those times when we ignore the law, we totally obey it. Hatfield strongly disputed that the videos were a journalistic endeavor in his filing, and also said that courts recognize that trespassing under false pretenses is actionable even when the perpetrator claims to be engaged in journalism. And it raises an interesting question in theory, except for the fact that, I'm used to, and maybe this is the bad model for it because it has always bothered me that they do things like this. But it seems to me that the more widely recognized traditional journalists, like, say, the Washington Post and New York Times, though we dispute sometimes whether or not they're doing their jobs, do things like, well, we've got a hold of a very important story that could perhaps change or in some way impact the outcome of the election, but we'd better hold it until after the election because we don't want to influence the election because that would be outside of the role of a proper journalist. Even though it's like, well, if it's government activity in particular, that is to say, in the example I'm thinking of, the warrantless surveillance discovered in 2004 being perpetrated by the George W. Bush administration as he stood for re-election in 2004. And they said, well, we better not report this because it could change the outcome of the election. On the other hand, we have on the other side James O'Keefe saying, no, what we're doing here as journalists is not only are we releasing that information when we come along, but we're going to generate that information. We are going to produce a series of videos designed to hurt Democratic candidates in advance of the midterm elections. That's journalism's. And, of course, I imagine that means that Republicans would say, well, that's what was the aim of reporting on warrantless surveillance, except, again, it's not the same thing, even with a sitting senator running for re-election, as it is to say, well, this happened and the unitary executive has okayed it and is now asking for the authority to okay it again in the future. Do you want to give him that authority is a very different question from what happened here. Anyway, time for our next break coming up. Let's see what we can squeeze in before we get there. We don't have to squeeze anything else in, as a matter of fact, because we got to the end of the article without even realizing it. So there you have it. That's what James O'Keefe and his gang are up to this time. No boats, no dildos or sex toys involved in this particular sting operation this time around. I guess he's learned his lesson from that, or maybe he just ran out of money or lost all the dildos. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning program here on Rich Radio. I'm calmed down now. I'm being asked by Armando whether he wants to discuss some stuff with me, and I just want to caution him that, he's coming on a Shock Jock show. So, yeah, sure, we'll absolutely talk about things with you. I was thinking at this point of moving on either to the question or the reporting on the Trump Organization business model that we left off of earlier in the week, the Pump and Trump story, or possibly onto David Dayen's, at long last, write-up of how Sears was gutted by its own CEO, and we could move to any of those things, or we could, we'll see what Armando wants to talk about. Door's open, Armando. You're free to wander on in and seek your own clicks for yourself here on the shocking Kagro in the Morning show. Doesn't result in a lot of clicks, but it's worth your time if you want to get something off your chest. The other story, I wanted to take a moment, pat myself on the back, because that's something I love to do in front of everybody. Just to say, I think we made a good call in bringing up the Heritage Foundation story yesterday. Maybe that's something you want to talk about too. And their judicial clerkship boot camp. That's the kind of story I'm talking about, sort of exploding into wider consciousness just after, we realized it was kind of important too. And again, this isn't something I uncovered. I read it. It was fully reported in mainstream traditional media. It just didn't really explode into the wider consciousness until, and not because of, but it just happened to explode just after we shared that story yesterday. It just was ready to go and people were interested in it. And I think, I think sometimes these things happen because then we retweet the story and other journalists get a hold of it and say, oh, that really is a big story. I enjoy when we pick something out just before its explosion because it means that we have a pretty good eye for what's news, and you guys as well in retweeting those things help make those stories happen. Anyway, Armando is here. Might as well include them in the conversation because otherwise it's just a huge waste of your time. Right, Armando?
Yeah, I'm listening via Skype.
Yeah. Okay.
No, to follow up on that heritage story, I assume it's the one about the clerkship
Yes.
training, Federal Clerkship Training Academy.
Yes.
Which, okay. I want to couple that with a speech that John Roberts gave that was covered by Joe McCarter at Daily Kos a few days ago.
Okay.
And he talked about how the judiciary has to avoid being a part of politics.
Yeah.
Well, here's a good way to do that, Chief Justice Roberts. Tell federal clerks they can't take a training academy at one of the most partisan and outrageous groups in America.
That would be a good thing to say.
I don't know if there is a rule that prohibits that, but if there isn't, there should be.
It's a weird area, and it's an area. Well, it hasn't been done for, I don't think, for judicial clerks, but it's not far removed from things that used to happen all the time for legislative staffers. Although it's considerably. It's probably more understandable for legislative staffers who, after all, are serving elected officials.
Exactly.
Political actors.
That's why Roberts' point here should be, hey, you guys shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And you also should, by the way, shouldn't put a partisan hack like Brett Kavanaugh on the bench.
Yeah.
That might save you as well. But they don't care. And Roberts is the biggest hack of all in the sense that he fakes it.
It's not even really probably necessary to do what they're doing, but I guess they figure.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess the judge will know, oh, this is one of ours, if it's a crazy Republican judge.
Yeah, but you just do that by hiring from the right schools and on the right recommendations.
Right recommendations, right. And, of course, if they go to the Supreme Court, they know the feeders know who to feed to who.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you have Tiger Mom at Yale Law School will tell you
dress the women properly.
Yeah, and that's who you take. And you know, I mean, if they're you get the resumes, right? And so even if you're just clerking for just a circuit court judge or any federal district judge, whatever, you're working your way up the ranks, to put Federalist Society activities on your resume. They see that.
Yes.
Take it seriously. The Heritage Foundation has kind of a history with this. Just sort of fill in some background. I mentioned yesterday and just a few minutes ago, this is the sort of thing that usually happens for legislative staffers. It's somewhat more understandable because at least you're working for political actors in this, even though by the time you're working for them as legislative staffers, it's not supposed to be political work. But this is an old complaint among conservatives and Republicans. It used to be that, it's still the case, that very often newly elected legislators and the staff who come with them, if they too are new to Capitol Hill or Washington, they need some training in how Congress works. How do I file a bill? Basic stuff.
How the swap works.
Yeah, essentially. And it's obviously colorable information, but, there's some arguably nonpartisan information that you need to know. If I want to submit a bill about how, about doing something, like I watched, I'm Just a Bill on Schoolhouse Rock.
Use a copy machine.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of things.
Well,
sure.
yeah. Which office to bring it
there's
to.
There's basics on how to do things.
There's a hopper on the floor, on the clerk's desk, and you actually literally bring your paperwork over there and sign it and put it in there, and now it's a bill. And it used to be that information, you got to train people in that and teach people how that's done. And it used to be that training was run by people from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, which used to be a legitimate sort of thing that people said, A, Kennedy's name is in it. Wow, that's awesome. B, Harvard University. Therefore, wow, that's the smartest. And who should train people how government works? People from the School of Government at Harvard.
Yes. But then they gave Sean Spicer a fellowship and ruined everything.
well before they did that, conservatives in the Newt Gingrich era realized Harvard, why that's a liberal bastion, and we don't want our Republican shock troops elected in the Republican Revolution of 1994 trained by these liberal eggheads who will teach them how to put papers in a basket in the most liberal fashion. We want our papers put in a basket like a hardcore conservative would put them in there. Just really hard, body slam them into the hopper. That's how you do it. You don't just place papers in there. You beat the living crap out of paper, and then you stuff it in the box and say, suck it. That's what you do. That's how.
To own the libs.
Yeah, so, right. Yeah, that's how you submit legislation, to own the libs. And so they decided that, no, it won't be the Harvard school, or at least you can go to the stupid Harvard school, egghead, moron, loser school if you want. But if you want to get a good committee assignment, let's say, with our Republican conference, you should go to the real training on how things really work being held at the Heritage Foundation. That's how they got into that game. And what was amazing was everybody started to go there, and then immediately, like, Democrats started to send their people to that one too, because we want to know how the Republicans who are going to run things are going to think things work, and that's important to us. And the Harvard one sort of withered away, although I think it came back after a while. And now this is something they could have had CRS do, and CRS does run their own, the Congressional Research Service, run their own training programs, but it's not the official, newly elected members and top staffers one. So the Heritage Foundation moved into that game a long time ago and kind of stayed in there, and now they realized, oh, there's another branch of government we've finally succeeded in taking over. We should teach people, in case they weren't paying attention when they went to University of Chicago Law School or George Mason University Law School, or in some cases, the Ivy schools. If they didn't take enough classes with the law and economics people who would teach them how to game this stuff and how to help their judges and justices craft opinions so that they do just a little bit too much more than they're supposed to, so that we can piggyback on little breadcrumbs that they leave in their decisions and their opinions onto the next case that we're genetically engineering to make it to the Supreme Court. Well, that's a lost opportunity. So why don't we just teach them that here in case they didn't pick it up in law school like they were supposed to, because they were, drunk all the time, let's say. So it's not a new idea. It's just sort of, I guess, new. Maybe I missed an earlier attempt to do this with judicial clerks. They've been doing this with the judges themselves for a while, too. The Mercatus Center, George Mason University, now the Antonin Scalia School of Law, which is horrific to think about. But they've been holding these seminars for judges. Bring federal judges in, and we'll teach them how to, diminish the jury awards for tort plaintiffs by awarding, utilizing economic precepts like, well, I'll award you the then present value of your damages, and you can earn back the balance of what you say you're owed with earned interest elsewhere. Things like that. But bringing them law and economics precepts, or letting people off the hook for breach of contract on the theory of efficient breach, for instance. These are the things that I was that's the way I learned tort law at George Mason University School of Law. That was just the way it was taught. Yeah, all of the previous tort law is wrong. You should handle damages this way.
The whole law and economics thing was basically bypassed by Republican legislators. They basically just ended up saying, we're capping
right.
awards.
Well,
much for the market.
I know, we were wasting our time trying to come up with intellectual underpinnings for it, and then they realized we don't really need that. We can just say this is what the law is, which is supposedly the power of the courts anyway. So no one will, but no one will bother themselves with it if we pass it in the legislature and just say, now it is what the law is, and you don't have to worry about moving us there. We'll just put us there.
Exactly. You don't have to do any gyrations and federalisms or anything else that you thought mattered.
So it's an interesting story. It probably shouldn't be happening, but it will happen, under the table anyway. So, I mean, there is that. But yes, the Chief Justice should probably warn them off of, this doesn't make it any easier for us to
pretend we're not political.
Right, to succeed in the charade, yes. And to the extent that we want it to succeed, this only hurts us. So please do this secretly.
I feel like that charade is over anyway. And
that could be. Honestly,
the law professors and the law people who talk about it will continue. There was an article just yesterday by Rick Haas in Slate that Professor Tribe plugged about. Look how these smart progressive lawyers are using grammar to convince conservative justices.
Mm-hmm.
They gave some example of how they were trying to get Gorsuch. By the way, we don't know how Gorsuch voted yet, so we'll see if that even works in these limited scope things. Because, but that doesn't work in the constitutional cases or the big cases either. They don't care. You remember, it's like being a textualist. Let me show you the text. And of course, there's the great example of how textualists and originalists are phonies. You can look at and it was mentioned in the article in passing, not realizing that it actually undermined the entire premise.
Mm-hmm.
But you can read the 11th Amendment to the Constitution.
What, me now?
I'll read it to you.
Oh, all right. We can do whatever we want.
The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law and equity.
Yes.
Commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state.
Huh. Okay. We don't talk about that one much.
State sovereign immunity comes from, right?
Okay, yes.
You can't sue a state of the United States in a federal court by invoking diversity jurisdiction, which is being a, quote, citizen of another state.
Okay.
Though a state doesn't have citizenship, so it wouldn't even be diversity. But so let's just say it's a blanket prohibition that I am a citizen of the state of Florida. I can't sue Georgia in federal court.
Okay.
That's what it says, right?
That's what it appears to say.
You know what Scalia and Thomas and all these textualists says that means?
You can have guns?
They said that too. But this particular text, they read to me that nobody can sue a state in federal court. Not even a citizen of the same state. Even though the text says by citizens of another state.
I see.
I mean, what does citizens of another state mean?
Is this a trick question? I mean, I guess it is for
them. It ended up being a trick question.
Yeah.
You think I'm kidding? There's a decision.
Yeah.
From 1998. Alden v. Maine. You can look it up. Excuse me, 1999.
Well, now I can look it up. Because you have the right date. Okay.
And it said that, it says another state, but it really means complete immunity from any suit by any citizen.
I see.
That's what they said it said.
Is it because they think in combination, like, I guess you had mentioned
they
diversity.
Came up with some, but the principle is broader. Okay, if there's a broader blanket sovereign immunity, why does the 11th Amendment exist at all?
That is a good question. It is, after all, I guess probably the First Amendment not originally adopted along with the Constitution.
It was adopted, by the way, because of a decision by the Supreme Court in its early iteration that permitted a suit in federal court against a state by a citizen.
So it was good enough for the founders, but only for 10 years or so, because by...
I forget what the original case was. Chisholm, I believe, is the Chisholm v. Georgia, I believe, is the case that I'm thinking of. But just be clear that they decided there was an amendment to the Constitution because the Congress didn't agree with the decision.
Yes.
And the amendment says what it says.
It does.
They didn't say we're granting complete and blanket immunity. They said we're giving, citizens of another state immunity.
Yes. I mean, it says here, ratified February 7th, 1795. So it's not likely that they forgot between the framing and original adoption of the Constitution in 1795 that if they meant for there to be blanket immunity, they could have said so. They remember how these things were written. They decided to say something else.
No, and Chisholm was decided in 1793. Oh. They passed a constitutional amendment in 2 years, back in the days of the Pony Express.
Well, we were much closer together then.
And it said what it said. The language is there. It says by citizens of another state. It didn't say by anybody.
Yes.
It didn't say by anybody. It said by citizens of another state. And the textualists on the Constitution, Scalia and Thomas and all these people, and Alden v. Maine said that doesn't mean that.
Yeah. Well,
citizens of another state doesn't mean citizens of another state.
Right.
So, you know what? I do not need to listen to anybody tell me how I'm going to convince a bunch of political partisan hacks on how to do these things. There's one thing that matters on the Supreme Court. It's one number, 5. Uh-huh. All the rest of it is hooey.
It's starting to look that way.
Starting.
Well, okay. We're starting to say it.
Finally. And Kavanaugh's good for that purpose. And I think when we first talked about Kavanaugh, you and I said I think he's going to be put there. And I don't know that that's the worst thing. I mean, it's a terrible moral thing for the country because it shouldn't be that someone like him is sitting on the court.
Yeah.
But,
but he is.
But leaving that aside, having the court exposed for the partisan hackery, it is. John Roberts can give all the speeches he wants. Nobody cares. Nobody believes him. Republicans know it's a partisan hack. Democrats know it's a partisan hack institution. And I don't think there's any going back to it, really. But we'll see. People have short memories. For example, this morning, speaking of short memories, this morning, Mark Murray is a good reporter. Says, where is the Democrats' response to Trump's assault on civility? Because of the reporter thing last night, where he celebrated Jim Forte's attack on Ben Jacobs, reporter for The Guardian.
Yes.
And I said, boy, did you forget all those pieces about how the Democrats are being uncivil here? I mean, that was just like last week. And you're wondering where it is, because every time the Democrats say something, you say, oh, that's too uncivil. That's coarsening our discourse. Every never Trumper told me how we've converted them into Trumpsters by being uncivil.
Yes, right. We forced their hands.
We forced their hand. Yes, he's horrible, but you guys made me do it.
Yeah, yes. I don't know.
And the media played it wrong. I could pull out all the articles.
Yeah. I noticed something. I mean, slightly off of that topic, but somewhat related. Just in the sense of, well, what are you guys doing? What's the matter with you people? After everybody's reaction this morning to the mention of Gianforte and his assault yesterday, everybody's outraged. I happened to notice Maggie Haberman retweeting the Politico story, headlined "How do you solve a problem like Hillary?" And that was their big story. And the thing that Maggie Haberman wanted to talk about this morning was, when is she going to shut up and go away? Why does she keep inserting herself into politics? She might run again. Oh my God. et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, well, they just murdered a guy. He just said it's a good idea to body slam people. There's people making throat slashing gestures out there. All right, well, we reported it. Now, hey, what about that Hillary Clinton? Can you believe this woman? My God. I thought that was really amazing.
That's a bubble. And they talk about getting out of the bubble, and they're in a bubble. For a couple of reasons. First, nobody cares about Hillary Clinton. I mean, the people that care support her. Right? Yeah. I mean, who's paying attention to these stories? And you can look at Twitter and see the responses to these people. Mm-hmm. And it's just attacks on them for actually bringing it up, and you're not doing your job. She's not this, she's not that. And it's crazy because I don't think there's any impact at all. This is not what it used to be, in my opinion. And I think that if they stopped and thought about it, they'd realize they're living in a 90s bubble that nobody cares about anymore.
And by the way, it's even an older bubble than I thought. I saw an article over the weekend. I don't know if I put it aside or not, whether I thought it was interesting enough to use on the show, but I guess I do now. But a story on the newly revealed deathbed confession of Lee Atwater that he made to a Democratic campaign rival who himself, I guess, is facing the end of his own life, and passed on the story of how Lee Atwater confessed to him on his deathbed that he set up the encounter between Gary Hart and Donna Rice.
Did he really?
Yeah. And that it was, it was all staged, that probably in all likelihood nothing had happened, but it didn't matter because all they wanted was to get the photo and arrange the whole thing. And he told him the story, and then this guy finally has passed on the story. And what was amazing to me was, one, reading the story was very interesting. Somewhere I made I think a weekend tweet about it. No chance I'll be able to scroll back and get the exact wording. But there was a passage in the story in which sort of described the press landscape and the relationship between Gary Hart and the press at the time, that he was considered the front runner, but there was just this sort of generalized feeling in the press that there was just something about Gary Hart. He was just hiding something. Not really sure what it was. There wasn't really any evidence of anything in particular, but he was just one of those guys. And it was clear from that to me that, like, here in 1984, 1988, the press was already, pre-Bill Clinton, already like, there's just something about the Democrat here. I don't know what it is, but I'll find it. In the middle of the Reagan era, in the middle of his passing the torch to George H.W. Bush, from basically straight out of the CIA at that point, I've got to find that thing. And so Atwater picked up on this and said, here's what I'll do. We'll get a guy that I know who's a big hanger-on to politicians everywhere, invite this guy out on a boat ride. And by the way, I mean, the story was great. The Monkey Business, you remember that was the name of the boat. That's what made the story. It was not this guy's boat. He contrived, as part of the plan, to have his boat in the shop, and they were going to have to borrow somebody else's boat to go out on that promised boat ride. It just happened to be a boat called the Monkey Business. And then they went out, and this guy invited Gary Hart, and he said, hey, I got some friends I'm bringing along. So Donna Rice and this other woman, and they're waiting around in the dock for the boat to be refueled, and he sits down on that pier piling just to wait. And all of a sudden, over comes Donna Rice, jumps on his lap, puts her arms around him. The other woman snaps a picture. Rice gets up. That's the encounter. That's it. Hand it over to the tabloid press. The Monkey Business. Woo! And that was the story. And all of that, by the way, happened, apparently, in the chronology of things, happened before the infamous line of "follow me around." That was a response to the fact that they had this picture. Oh, yeah? You think I'm fooling around with you? Follow me around for a while and find out. I had not realized that. It was very interesting. So this is a weird thing that's been going on with the press for a little while longer, at least. than the Clintons were even on the national scene, and that was kind of surprising to me. I don't know if that struck you as new. But anyway.
It should be shocking because the fact that Gary Hart, who was the front runner for the Democratic convention, for the Democratic nomination, got knocked out by a dirty trick.
Yeah.
Seems like a big deal.
It seems like it might be, and that was the general gist of the article. Sort of wistfully looking back, what else might have changed? We may never have had the Clintons at all because '92 wouldn't have been an open contest for them. But we'll be right back after our 2 minutes.
Anyway, we'll talk about that later.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show. You're on Netroots Radio. Still with Armando here. I'm still looking around for that Gary Hart article, but I will find it. Whether or not I find it in time to remember to give it to Scott to include in the roundup, we'll see. But it really happened, and there's links and everything, and I thought that was pretty amazing. Anyway,
it is amazing.
Took us afield, but all right. Let's see. I don't know. Is there more to feed off of on the judicial front, or
no? I mean, nothing you haven't heard before.
Okay, fair enough. Let's see. I was thinking perhaps of using the last segment to, let's see. I mean, there's the political stuff, of course, and we can get back to the Trump fraud issue. The New Yorker picked up on the story, and I guess Adam Davidson has a piece here that incredulously asks, is fraud part of the Trump organization's business model? In the New Yorker magazine. It is, of course, and it is at the heart of the business model, and I think everybody kind of knows that.
Well, if they've listened to us for 3 years, they certainly know that. I would
think it would become fairly obvious. However, apparently it's new to others, and it's been interesting watching the last couple of days, people saying, I'm trying to think of who was making the point here of, just generally speaking, another lesson, object lesson here in how vital to democracy it really is to take what we call white-collar crime seriously and to actually prosecute it.
There's two people that have been screaming about how the Democrats didn't do it. That being Matt Stoller and David Day.
Yes.
I think there's 2 points I would make on there. Take it seriously, absolutely.
That's a good idea.
But prosecutions aren't as easy as you think.
That is true, too.
Criminal prosecutions require proving beyond a reasonable doubt. And a lot of these crimes require what's called mens rea, scienter. That is, that people knew they were doing the fraud. Now, interestingly, I'd argue that civil cases should have been brought and should be brought now. And in that sense, let me tell you a story you may or may not have talked about, which is Michael Cohen's been back in the news the last couple of days. He's been seen being interviewed a lot by the SDNY, the Southern District of New York prosecutors, and also Mueller.
Donald Trump unfollowed him, as a matter of fact.
Right, and the point that Marcy Wheeler, our good friend Marcy, makes is it's very interesting that that Mueller hands Cohen off to him. It could be, there's 2 explanations. One, Cohen didn't have anything that helped Mueller and what he was working on, which, still you'd find out before you handed him off. Maybe he did, but doesn't appear to have been many interviews. Besides that, he signed a cooperation or signed an agreement that he's going to speak with Mueller at Mueller's request. So Mueller, I guess, gets the whole thing. But the handoff to SDNY is interesting for two reasons. A, the Trump-appointed United States attorney for the Southern District of New York is recused from any Trump-related inquiries. Second of all, Cohen is also cooperating with the state authorities.
Okay.
So, there's the old story about, now it's old, it's a few weeks old, about the tax evasion story. Unbelievably, of course, the New York Times buried its own story by never following up on it ever again.
Right. Well, how do you solve a problem like Hillary?
Yes,
what?
They would
Where
talk
am I?
about Hillary.
Okay.
That's what they'd rather talk about. And no, their political reports had no interest in that story. They have literally done nothing with it. They've asked nobody anything about it. And it's gone away. And it's gone away because the New York Times made it go away. And I have a theory, because I don't know if you remember the story. It's 14,000 words long.
Yes. I remember reading that it
Newspapers
was 14,000.
don't normally run 14,000 word stories.
Right.
And what they often do is they serialize them. They break them up to 2, 3, or 4 stories. And I know the New York Times knows how to do that. And you know how I know they know how to do that? Because when they were doing the Clinton cash hits, the Breitbart finance, Bannon pushed Clinton cash stories during the election, they ran 5, 6 different stories over the course of a week.
They did.
On it.
Yes, you mentioned this, and yeah, that's true. I guess Bannon just had a better eye for how to distribute the story. I wonder if he negotiated that,
or the New York Times agreed to do it that way.
Yes. I don't know whose idea it was.
Well, it was Bannon's idea, and he shopped it to the New York Times, and they bought it.
Yes. Okay, and did they? I mean, the agreement to do it as serialize it. I don't know whether he asked for that.
Maybe they made an agreement. He said, "I'll only give it to you if you serialize it." Yeah. That could be, but there's been precisely one New York Times story on its huge investigative story that took 2 years to report.
Yeah, those guys.
There's been no
reporters
follow-up.
Must be bummed.
There's been nothing. If you wanted to bury the story, you would do exactly what the New York Times has done.
I guess so.
Literally, there hasn't been an editorial about it. There hasn't been an op-ed. There's been nothing about this, frankly, stellar piece of work by their investigative unit.
Yeah.
The New York Times doesn't like having an investigative unit. They don't like uncovering stories. They don't like doing actual reporting. I made this point to you the other day. The New York Times has recruited every political reporter known to man. The political reporters don't do reporting. Politico. They do access.
Yes, Politico, just to be clear. It sounds like maybe you're saying political reporter. Politico reporters.
Politico invaded the New York Times political reporting. The New York Times political reporting was always kind of poor.
And they still have the attention of New York Times reporters like Maggie Haberman, who is retweeting Politico stories entitled "How do you solve a problem?"
Yeah,
like
you
Hillary?
Want to go through the list of Politico reporters who are now at
have done it.
New York Times political desk? That's just off the top of my head.
Yeah,
Maggie Haberman.
One more time. Yeah,
Glenn Thrush, Ken Vogel, Jonathan Martin. That's 4 of their top reporters right there.
Yeah.
And 4 of the worst reporters you will ever find in America. And I say that with no due respect, because they're not due any respect. I don't agree with anyone who says Maggie Haberman's a good reporter. She's a terrible reporter. She has talent, but she doesn't use it properly. She doesn't know what a story is. And you know what you need when you have a reporter who has talent? An editor to tell them what they should be covering. But who's the editor of the Washington Bureau of the New York Times? Do you know?
No,
I do.
Offhand I do not.
possibly the worst political reporter in the history of the New York Times.
Damn.
Elizabeth Buemiller.
Okay.
She's terrible. And again, nobody knows these names because they don't hate the media like I do, and I obsess over who stinks.
That
But
could
it's
be.
all very easy. And Dean Beckett's the worst editor in the history of the New York Times. Worse than Hal Raines, which is saying something.
Yes.
It's a very bad newspaper. I do urge people to cancel their subscription because you're supporting a newspaper that is doing damage to the country.
Sorry.
The New York Times is a cancer in the country. And I'm giving you examples of just a few, not even the other half of the story. And obviously I'm stemming this back to, Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton doesn't matter. Hillary Clinton's never running for anything ever again. She's not impacting the country. Maybe she wants to. Maybe she's doing things she shouldn't do or saying things she doesn't say. But so what?
Yes.
I'll concede.
Okay.
She shouldn't have said that. Okay, now what? Who cares? There have been 72 stories on what Hillary said about Monica Lewinsky.
Yes. Or some
There
number,
have been
yeah.
none. There have been none about Donald Trump's tax evasion story that the New York Times broke after a tremendous piece of work.
Mm-hmm.
There have been none.
That is true. Except for no New York Times follow-up stories. The only thing I've seen is, and I've been sympathetic with it, and I do sometimes. Matt Stoller goes over the top for me frequently.
Yeah, that's fine. We should have prosecuted the white-collar crime.
Yeah,
that's fine.
I thought that was important.
How about prosecuting Trump, though?
Well,
why doesn't Matt Stoller talk about that? That's one thing that because with every story, if you turn every story into about how shitty, how crappy, how crappy Democrats are, then people just tune you out.
Well,
the people you want to listen to will tune you out. You can put that as a sidebar. Oh, by the way, if we had done better, if Obama had done better prosecuting Wall Street after the meltdown.
Yes, that's the take certain folks take, and I mean it's not,
and it's fair.
Yeah.
He wasn't, and worse than that, he shouldn't. I'm less worried about the prosecutions than the fact that the rules were not followed in the sense of bank reorganizations. Citibank was insolvent. It should have been taken over by the government, reorganized, and sold. And all the people there should have been fired.
Yeah.
That's how you discipline, in my view, bank executives. You make them lose their jobs.
Yes.
It works.
That would be helpful. That's right. And it's like an impeachment for bankers. They don't, in the old days, they would not tend to have landed on their feet and back in banking again. I'm not certain that that's true anymore, but part of that is the fact that nobody ever really faced any consequences from any other sectors, government sectors, so why bother? But I guess in fairness to Matt Stoller, I will say that the tweet I've got in front of me, one, makes no mention of Obama, and two, calls for
fair enough.
This whole thing hinges on the fact that the Trump family ought to be pursued in this. So, he's in agreement with you there. One connection I wanted to make that I thought was interesting, you had mentioned, sometimes criminal prosecution isn't the best route to take because the burden of proof being what it is, it sometimes you end up decriminalizing the behavior in the minds of the public by losing the case, whereas civil proceedings much more likely to net what the lay folks watching view as a guilty verdict. If somebody finds themselves in trouble and subject to civil penalties, very few people say, well, it wasn't a criminal trial. We do, but most people don't. But then you're saying the missing or the tough part of it being able to prove the mens rea, the intent to commit a fraud, to commit a crime, but in white collar criminal prosecutions. I just wanted to bring that back to the way we train our lawyers, the way we train our judges, the way we train our clerks, and let you know, and just bring it back to law and economics again. I mean, that's the active program in the law and economics curriculum is teaching that although this thing was done, and although it was the intent of the business executives involved to do it, it ought not to be considered as legitimate mens rea. It instead ought to be dismissed as, well, that's a business decision, a business mistake that was made, and you have to have room for that. And
that's the argument.
In order to, otherwise you've stifled innovation, and therefore that's the worst thing ever, and et cetera, and so on. Somehow you lose your job doing a regular productive thing, because we might punish people who say things like, I'm going to take this manufacturing company and turn it into a finance company instead. Our job is going to be moving money around from one account to another and taking commissions off of that, not making widgets anymore. And when that fails miserably, because that's not the way the world works, you have to make things and sell them in order to make money, and eventually people catch on to what you're doing. Well, we can't punish that person for making that decision because they thought it would be really productive after all, even though, look, I've made a conscious decision to stop producing things. Oh, well, my definition of productive is different than yours. My definition of productive is I'm paying shareholders more money. I'm increasing the value of, I'm maximizing shareholder value, not by making things, but by moving money around and using accounting tricks. And that's what works. And I thought that was going to pay off for everybody, but it didn't. So that's not mens rea. That's just a mistake. And they teach you that in business law now. And so you make it, you pass the bar, you make a lot of political contributions, you end up as a federal district judge somewhere, then you get elevated to a circuit court, and all of a sudden, with the right clerkships and right connections, you're either on the Supreme Court or clerking for it or what have you, and you begin to work that into your decisions. And now you have legal precedent that says, yeah, the things that we used to call mens rea in the context of white-collar crime is no longer mens rea. And then you have a Justice Department stuck with that and saying, yeah, we need to shift from criminal prosecution to civil entirely in order to have any shot at illustrating that anybody has done anything wrong in this entire area of law. That's a big, big shift, how that happens. And, Matt Stoller, I think at least this tweet doesn't appear stuck on the idea that, yeah, that's Obama did that. It's 30 years of warped legal education funded by Olin, Mellon, Scaife families and the Federalist Society in law schools teaching, unsuspecting people who just think they're learning traditional law the exact opposite of traditional law and sending them out into the world. That's not Obama doing it. Not by himself, anyway. Though it was happening at Chicago, and he could have had his eyes open. Just thought I'd throw that in there for a Friday.
Obama did things wrong in the beginning, and maybe that was one of them. Maybe you can blame Holder. Maybe Holder's ties to big law firms was part of the problem. But I think fundamentally his problem was Tim Geithner. And I think it's interesting, the one guy we never hear from anymore is Tim Geithner. And he did pay a bit of a price, it seems to me. Yeah, he's making a lot of money. He's living a nice life. But this is a guy who could have made a lot of money a long time ago. He went in and he became, the Secretary of the Treasury because he wanted to be a big player in the public discourse. And he's been run out of the room.
That is true.
So there is that. I understand that's small potatoes, considering he's probably making $15 million a year for Goldman Sachs or whoever he works for.
I'll take it, but okay.
That's a price. If only we could have run the Iraq war supporters off as well as we ran off Geithner.
Yes. Okay. Well, we can take that. Let's see.
I see. I got caught for my FCC violation.
Yes, right. A good call there, I thought. D. Gordon Liddy, Ideologue, pointing out, yes, in the true spirit of shock jock ideal, we got an FCC violation way back there.
You could have said crucified by the FCC, which I don't know if you remember. Most of our listeners will not know what I'm talking about, but you seem to.
Yes, that was the
Howard Stern's first book was called Crucified by the FCC.
Yes, right, and I disclaim you. as
Yeah,
a coffee
right.
boy. So
Never seen him. Never
I don't
heard of
even
him.
know.
You barely know me. I'm
Right.
your MBS.
He was involved with the show for a very short time, 8 years.
I barely knew him. Maybe shook hands with him once.
Well, we have that going for us. So, all right. Well, to wrap
Does
up with
the FCC
this,
still do that stuff, by the way? I guess they
I
do.
don't know. I guess if you complain, and although I don't know, things have gotten so out of hand, they're usually deadlocked, and they, like every other federal board, and they can't decide on things.
I just figure that the FCC figures if it starts doing that with Trump as president, they're going to be like, okay,
Yeah, right.
this is kind
I
of a
mean,
mess.
you're going to have to fine everybody just for reporting the news.
Oh, here's a good piece of news from Mr. Nate Cohn.
Yeah.
In their polling, Democrats have eliminated the turnout deficit that hobbled them during the Obama era.
Aha. So
Yeah, it's interesting
Obama's
because you'll notice that parties that control the White House have turnout deficit problems generally.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's the
it's
midterm
true that
problem.
Republicans turn out better than Democrats just as a general matter. But they turn out worse when they hold the presidency, and the Democratic problem gets exacerbated by exacerbated when we hold the presidency. And listen, I don't think it's particularly insightful of me, but I'm surprised people don't pay attention to it, given the history. Ronald Reagan lost every midterm election. And then George H.W. Bush lost his midterm election. And then Bill Clinton lost his first midterm election. He actually won his second midterm election, ironically.
Yes.
And you know why.
Overreached by Republicans.
Overreached by Republicans. And then the next one was also won by the president's party, or relatively won by the president's party, but that was after 9/11. And that's when Saxby Chambliss was morphing Max Cleland.
Yes, right.
Who lost 3 limbs in Vietnam, and he was a draft dodger, and Chambliss was a draft dodger into Osama bin Laden. But 2006, of course, the Out Party won the midterms. In 2010, the Out Party won the midterms. In 2014, the Out Party won the midterms. There's a pretty good chance that the Out Party will win the midterms, depending on the map. The reason why you don't feel strongly about the Senate is because, and this was reported a year ago, I'm not making it up as an excuse now, this is the worst map for a out political party in the history of Senate elections. We're defending 11 more seats, and the 11 hardest seats. It's like if you pick, let me make this map as bad as possible for Democrats. And this is the map you would create. Yeah. By the way, 2020, it's reversed. There will be a very good map for Democrats and a bad map for Republicans, both in 2020 and 2022.
Yeah, and people have known that for years.
Right. So if by some, off chance the Democrats take the Senate this year, the chances are they are going to hold it for a few years. At least six of them, almost certainly. The House, who knows? It could flip in a general election, but the reality is that even on horse race coverage, political reporters are terrible. Oh my God, Heidi Heitkamp's in deep trouble. Yeah, Heidi Heitkamp was in deep trouble the day after she was elected.
Yes.
She won by 1 point in 2012 against a very bad opponent. In I don't know what the PVI is. That's the Republican lean, but it's got to be at least 10 points for North Dakota.
I would think.
You and I interviewed the previous senator from North Dakota once.
Yes, right.
In his office in Washington, D.C., Byron Dorgan. And he had been there forever. And I'm not saying he retired because he thought he was going to lose, but he probably got tired of how hard he had to work to win.
Yes. And also, you're actually right. He probably did. The nicest way of saying it is, I can't take it anymore.
Because I spent 6 years on the phone asking people for money.
Right. In Montana. So, all right.
And that's the old thing. Now it's a little easier to raise money in the sense that we have all these electronic methods, and you can get things done virally, and there's a lot of conduits. Daily Kos being an important one, by the way. Speaking of North Dakota, did you see?
Yes.
That the Daily Kos community raised $250,000 in 24 hours to help Native Americans.
But yeah, wow. Yes, the folks being disenfranchised because they don't have street addresses.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's not a lost cause there.
Proud and appreciative that
there are things that can be done and we pay for it.
So
yeah,
it's good.
Excellent. And they have come. Daily Kos has come through very quickly with a lot of money for Native American tribal communities a couple times in the past, and it's because we have a lot of people who are actually Native American and affiliated with tribes who are a part of our team and say, yeah, this is a community that requires attention as the focus of activism too. It's nice to see, at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, I was just impressed
with the numbers.
People were so willing to put their money there, and I think part of it is empathy for the plight of Native Americans and what Republicans are trying to do to them in that state. But I also think Heidkamp's vote on Kavanaugh has some bearing on this too. It's an attempt to help her win re-election after she took what I consider a very brave vote.
Yeah, it would have been a lot harder to raise that money.
Yeah. So I hope it helps, and I hope she pulls it through. It'd be good. Very, very good. I know it's 10:55. I'll give you one last meaningless shot.
All right.
Before we go away for the weekend, which is this: Joe Manchin received 3 endorsements yesterday from coaches. Nick Saban, Bob Huggins, who's the basketball coach at West Virginia. Yes. And though he's not really a coach, I guess he coached a year or two, but it's sort of a fake coach. Jerry West, who is from West Virginia, played for the Mountaineers many years ago. Of course, is most famous as the logo for the NBA, and of course, as being one of the all-time great basketball players of all time, and an even better basketball executive. So he got endorsements from these 3 guys, which fine and good, but what happened is stick to sports.
That's true. Interesting. All right, well, we never really often said that, but okay.
We don't believe in that, of course. They're
no Taylor Swift.
I just thought it was interesting that, all right, well, I guess now it's okay. And John Elway, of course, cut an ad for right-wing oil and mining interests in Denver to fight against a anti-fracking referendum. So apparently the only person who can't talk about politics is Colin Kaepernick. Everybody else gets to.
That's weird.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
Can't explain it.
Hard to explain. I wonder what explains that. Anyway, I'll give you your last 2 minutes so you can say a proper goodbye, and thank you for letting me come on and alert the FCC.
Yes, right. Now we're in trouble. Not that we broadcast anywhere. Thanks very much, Armando, and it gave us a chance to theorize and go a little bit further afield than the articles would ordinarily take us. That's what's good for our show. Yes, it is nearly time to wrap things up and hand it over to Justice Putnam on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Something I meant to insert into the pre-weekend mix here. I'll just one will just depress you, so I'll just save it for next week when we're already depressed because it's Monday again. The other, Mark Sumner on top of things over at Daily Kos. The October surprise that Republicans are going full bat guano, let's say, racist, anti-Semitic crazy train. I mentioned to you earlier in the program that a lot of the stupid conspiracy theorist level, Jade Helm level idiocy that Republicans are passing around, including the accusation that George Soros is paying people to migrate to the United States, which really needs almost no incentive at all whatsoever. It's just one of many stupid ideas being circulated. But yes, Donald Trump himself is in on that particular one, recirculating that same stupid video. Mark Sumner's got the summary of just how crazy they're going and how many high-level members of Republican officialdom are joining in, and also, of course, blowing the anti-Semitic dog whistles and or foghorns at the same time. So you should take a look at that. Now, of course, the very next thing you should do is stay tuned to Netroots Radio right here where you are for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, for the very non-shock jockey Justice Putnam, who handles things like a professional at all times. I would say so. Anyway, there's still nonetheless plenty of shocking stories to listen in for. Republicans are employing a deliberate strategy of incitement, can you believe it, to rile their base with the Kavanaugh and Caravan rally cry, when it might be Khashoggi and collusion that the rest of the nation considers instead. And then a black teen didn't like being called the N-word, can you imagine it? So her Wisconsin high school suspended her. Sounds like the perfect outcome there. Trump economic advisor Larry Things Go Better with Coke Kudlow called Justin Trudeau that little punk kid running Canada.
From Daily Co's Radio.
Yikes.
On netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Still more. Lawmakers demand full disclosure of Trump's financial ties to Saudi Arabia amid accusations he's conspiring to cover up the Khashoggi murder. And, let's see, more charges leveled against Devin Nunes that he hid evidence on Trump and Russian meddling. And America's archaeology data keeps disappearing. What's that about? Find out next.